The trial of President Trump just hit its final day of questions from Senate jurors, several exchanges getting heated, and the often sober Adam Schiff throwing down.
Let me begin with something in the category of you can't make this stuff up. The judge says if the Congress can't enforce its subpoenas in court, then what remedy is there? And the Justice Department lawyer's response is impeachment. Impeachment. You can't make this up.
Even getting some laughs from the normally austere Senate chamber. Meanwhile, a top Trump lawyer arguing the whole focus should actually be on the debunked Biden conspiracy theory.
I'll tell you who was open for business. You know who was open for business? His son was on the board of a company that was under investigation for Ukraine, and you're concerned about what Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, was doing when he was over trying to determine what was going on in Ukraine?
And this is where the trial of a president in the United States is different than all other trials. Like it or not, the Constitution creates this system, and it gives senators the power to choose some topics. For Republican senators, that has at times meant distracting away from the trial's core question. Did Trump abuse his power or not? Now, one Democratic House manager also got fiery in her rebuttal to a different question from Republican senators also on the Bidens.
Looking at the Bidens, no matter how many times we called their name, we have no evidence to point to the fact that either Biden has anything at all to tell us about the president shaking down a foreign power to help him cheat in the next election. The precious election, trying to steal each individual in this country's vote.
And there were more exchanges like that, and a lot of them had fireworks. But you have to remember, and this is why we're doing these breakdowns for you, some of the most legally, constitutionally pivotal exchanges are actually the less obviously exciting ones. Like, take this interesting thought framed through a question from a potential swing Republican vote, Senator Susan Collins, making a pertinent point, posing it as such. Is what Donald Trump did here, is it so bad that it would basically never be appropriate for the U.S. government to do?
A question from Senator Collins and the other senators for both parties. Are there legitimate circumstances under which a president could request a foreign country to investigate a U.S. citizen, including a political rival, who is not under investigation by the U.S. government? If so, what are they and how do they apply to the present case?
It would be hard for me to contemplate circumstances where that would be appropriate.
Schiff underscoring the point that he views this all as inappropriate, and again, reinforcing what this whole trial now seems to be turning on, the calls to get John Bolton to testify.
We have demonstrated we believe that this scheme was entirely corrupt. But if you have any question about that, ask John Bolton. If there's any question about whether the motive was mixed or not mixed, ask John Bolton.
He will not be acquitted. You cannot be acquitted if you don't have a trial. And you don't have a trial if you don't have witnesses and documentation and that. I would hope that the senators, if it comes to a tie or if there's a question of hearing testimony or receiving documents, would leave it up to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Joining us now, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Democrat Chris Murphy of Connecticut. And I'd like to start off by asking you a bit about what Speaker Pelosi was just saying. So, no witnesses, no trial. We can all give our opinion as to what we think about the sad state of our democracy right now. But what's next?
Well, I mean, this is going to be an enormous stain on the United States Senate if today goes as expected. There's also there's also rumors that we may not even have deliberations, that we may not go behind closed doors and talk to each other about the consequences of what we've heard. So we're going to have a trial with no witnesses. We're going to have a trial with no deliberations. That isn't a trial. And I think Speaker Pelosi is right. Then this can't be a real acquittal. And of course, we're going to find out what John Bolton said. I mean, the fact is the Senate Republicans can't cover this up forever. So we're going to find out exactly what Donald Trump said to John Bolton. We're going to find out eventually the scope of this corruption. And then it's going to be too late because the trial will be over and we'll be in the middle of a re-election campaign in which the president will be potentially empowered, potentially green-lighted to do more of the kind of corruption that he engaged in with Ukraine.
Senator, it's Willie Geist. Good to see you this morning. We've had a table full of political experts explaining why they believe Lamar Alexander and others will vote today the way that they will vote. But I'm interested in your view from the inside of the United States Senate. Why someone like, let's take Senator Alexander as an example, someone who's retiring, kind of an institutionalist, a guy who's been there for a long time, a conventional Republican, an establishment Republican. Why would he vote, again, not to convict the president, but even to allow evidence and witnesses?
Well, I think these Republicans are putting themselves before the country, and they know that if John Bolton's testimony comes out before they render a verdict, if the American public get to see the former national security advisor talking about the scope of President Trump's direction, his personal direction of this corruption, it makes it really hard for them to vote to acquit. And so they are trying to make the acquittal vote on them as easy as possible. I don't think, though, they get away with it, because I think, frankly, a lot of folks out there, even Trump supporters, are going to be pretty pissed when they hear this evidence, when the book comes out, and the president has already been cleared. So I'm so disappointed in my Republican colleagues, because this has just become a show trial, and it does have consequences for the future of the Senate. I don't know why there would be any serious impeachment trial in the future after this precedent is set.
Mike, I would just say one more time, the polling.
Some more breaking news, one of those days around here, this time from Lev Parnas's attorney, Joseph Bondi. He sent a letter to Mitch McConnell, I assume making another effort to have more information, more witnesses as part of this fateful decision. Here's a quote from that letter from the attorney to Lev Parnas to Mitch McConnell. Quote, if Lev Parnas was called as a witness, he would provide testimony based upon personal knowledge corroborated by physical evidence, including text messages, phone records, documentary evidence, and travel records, which is directly relevant to the president's impeachment inquiry. Joyce, how do you turn down another witness with firsthand knowledge?
This is a prosecutor's dream, right? You've actually got Lev Parnas and John Bolton in a bidding war over who gets to be your star witness. This is not to make too much of it, because I know we call a lot of things amazing and remarkable. These are now two witnesses with firsthand testimony. We all remember that week where the president complained that we needed to hear firsthand testimony, and we weren't. These are two firsthand testimony witnesses, and the Senate wants to close its doors before it hears from them. After seeing these letters and these proffers, you can't.
Nicole, he also names names.
Yeah. What do you got? I gave you, we show our work up here. We spread the letter around. David did some of this for me.
Yeah, so the letter is essentially Parnas's attorney saying, if you call him to testify, this is what he will say. In addition to your point of providing material evidence, he says, Mr. Parnas would testify to the efforts he and a handful of Republican operatives engaged in over a period of months to remove Ambassador Yovanovitch and gather dirt on Joe and Hunter Biden. Mr. Parnas would testify that those holding various roles in this plot included the GOP Super PAC America First, President Donald Trump, Vice President Pence, former Energy Secretary Rick Perry, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Attorney General Bill Barr, Senator Lindsey Graham, Congressman Devin Nunes, Nunes' staffer Derek Harvey, journalist John Solomon, attorneys Joe DeGeneva, Victor Tensing, and Mr. Giuliani.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
I mean, naming names and implicating our country. I mean, this is where it all goes from political calculations and slicing and dicing to truly frightening and uncharted national security territory. Lev Parnas, I believe the allegation is that they all had knowledge of Donald Trump's quid pro quo, of Donald Trump's effort to get dirt on the Bidens from the leader of Ukraine. So if he's saying that Barr, the Vice President, Pence, the Energy Secretary, and the President were all involved, and the Senate passes this up, and all that comes out, all the President's men are implicated, what happens next?
Senators on Capitol Hill will vote today on whether to bring new evidence into the impeachment trial of President Trump.
In order to bring new witnesses to the trial, Democrats would need 4 Republicans to vote for witnesses for a majority of 51 senators. Depending on today's outcome, the trial could end today.
increasingly confident they have the votes to block new witnesses and quickly wrap up President Trump's impeachment trial.
The president will be acquitted in a bipartisan manner.
But top Democrats now arguing even if the president wins in the Senate, the verdict will be illegitimate.
Well, he will not be acquitted. You cannot be acquitted if you don't have a trial, and you don't have a trial if you don't have witnesses and documentation.
Inside the chamber, a rare rebuke. Chief Justice John Roberts refusing to read Senator Rand Paul's question that identified the alleged whistleblower in the Ukraine saga.
The presiding officer declines to read the question as submitted.
I think this is an important question, one that deserves to be asked.
President Trump today not answering questions, but on Twitter declaring game over with a months-old clip of Bolton praising his dealings with Ukraine.
And they were very warm and cordial calls.
The president's defenders insisting Democrats want Bolton to try to bolster their weak case.
They don't want to speed up. They want to slow it down and take up the election year and continue this political charade.
Democrats warning if President Trump is not convicted despite pressuring a foreign government to investigate a political rival, the consequences in 2020 will be severe.
No matter how much hard work our intelligence community and law enforcement community is trying to do, we cannot guarantee the integrity of this year's election.
And slamming this argument from Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz.
And if a president does something which he believes will help him get elected in the public interest, that cannot be the kind of quid pro quo that results in impeachment.
What do you make of Alan Dershowitz's?
I couldn't believe it. It was just preposterous. Totally preposterous.
The question and answer session wraps up tonight. Then tomorrow, senators will debate and vote on whether to hear from those additional witnesses, and they could vote to acquit the president by day's end.